Welcome to Casual Politics, Geoffrey Robinson. Thank you very much for accepting my request, and I'm very grateful to you. You need no introduction. You've been Member of Parliament since 1976, almost 40 years. And you've been also Paymaster General under Tony Blair, following your resignation in 1998. My first question is that how exciting was it for you to enter in Parliament in 1976?
I think it's always a very exciting moment of anybody's life. If it isn't exciting then, it never will be, and if it isn't exciting, you shouldn't be going into politics. It's a very exciting, it's a new development in anybody's life, and I started off in politics, as you may know. I was initially a researcher at Transport House back in the days when we were renting premises from the Transport and General Workers Union. Frank Cousins, this is all prehistory. You don't want to know anything about it, any of that. But that's when I started, and I got a bit fed up with that, researching, because we were in government very soon. I joined after the 64 victory and just before the 64 victory, when Wilson was a tiny majority, just about 4, and then we lost 1 because we had to provide the Speaker. So we're down just to 3. And a nightmare, one nightmare that Harold had refused to talk about having a small majority, so he would reply, "Oh, we don't talk about nightmares." And he got one, long one. But that was for 18 months till the end of 1966. I was working for the party. Of course, we won that, and it was a great new dawn. 1966 was, we turned this tight majority which had disappeared in the year. We were down really to no majority. He turned it into a majority of 100, which was like in those days the Blair and Thatcher type victories that came much later. And of course at that point it was a brand new dawn, if you like, as I think Tony called it at the time. And we were all very excited. I got fed up, as I told you, we'll get back into that in a moment. I went off and went into industry to learn, see what was happening there and see what I could learn before hopefully coming back into politics, which I then did. I suppose it was 10 years later, was it? 1976, yes, about 10 years later, 8 years, following my move from being a researcher at Transport House to go into industry. I came back then, and bright new dawn for me too, as I went into the House of Commons. Little did I know what awaited me when I got there. 18 years of Mrs. Thatcher.
18 years. And how surprising was it for you to enter in Parliament and then to see a change of Prime Minister?
Yes, well, of course, when you go into the House, as you know, you pledge the oath of allegiance to Her Majesty, and you sign the book of members. A wonderful moment, and our side were tremendously excited about it, because this was after the position where the government was in a fairly tight majority by then. Don't forget we'd won this 100 majority in 1966, but by the time I got in 1976, we'd had a Conservative government. We'd lost the 1970 election. We'd had a Conservative government for 4 years under Ted Heath. And then Wilson got back in 74, tiny majority again. I think it was in fact a minority government at the time. So we just had a Barist majority. My seat represented our majority in the House, which was of course dependent on the other minority parties for its effectiveness. And if we had lost that seat, which was Coventry North West, Wilson would have had a terrible position, which we'll come to in a minute. But the point was that we wouldn't just have lost our nominal majority of 1, which we couldn't count on. It was in no meaningful sense a working majority, but we'd have lost our right to have a majority on all the committees of the House, and then it gets very difficult.
And then to see Harold Wilson to get replaced by James Callaghan, was it a loss to your party?
Well, I think so, yes. I think the party came to see that very much so. Harold resigned quite suddenly. He'd planned it very carefully. I had no inkling of it, having been out of politics. Because I'd been in industry, and through a combination of circumstances had found this opportunity to run again, to run for the first time for Coventry North West, and I won, but I'd been out of politics. He met me before. The other part of the procedure when you were elected a member and you were sworn in at the House of Commons is you sign in, your speaker greets you, and then behind the speaker's chair, of course, Harold Wilson, the leader of the Labour Party, waiting to greet me. And I'd known him from when I was working at Trasford House. Always got on with him particularly well, and he and I got on well. He said, "Geoffrey, I'm very pleased. Personally, I'm very, very pleased. I know you're going to do very well." And I thought, well, that's good. He remembers me, and I'm well in with him still, and he's going to promote me and give me good chances and all that. What he really meant was, when he said he was very pleased, because I'd won and there wasn't a major crisis about the government majority in the way there would have been had I lost, he was able to go through with his resignation the next week. Couldn't believe it. And that was my baptism, if you like, into the new world of politics. I was suddenly greeted by one Prime Minister whom I knew well and got on with extremely well, and then was taking part in a leadership election for which it saw James Callaghan, very good Prime Minister, elected as his successor. Well, he didn't inherit the best situation. Well, it was bad circumstances. I think also, though, and Dennis was partly to blame here, they were architects of their own misfortune, to the extent that the winter of discontent which they plunged us into was bad. The figures of the Treasury didn't turn out to be anything like as another experience we'd had, as bad as they were predicted to be. But nevertheless, they went along with the policy of £1.05% or whatever it was, which we embarked on. Nobody thought could hold. It was a very tight policy, the wages policy. I think the percentages I gave there weren't quite right, but the point was that a very tight wages policy, it made it impossible for them to really get through the winter. And that was 1979, of course, after Callaghan had been the Prime Minister for then a few years. He really was, as you said, unlucky in a set of circumstances, made worse by that.
And then you talked about Harold Wilson, Dennis Healey. Why we don't have Dennis Healey's, Enoch Powell's, Michael Foot's, Harold Wilson's, Lord Haysham's anymore, or Geoffrey Robinson's anymore?
Oh, I think you do. I've never been so prominent as they have been in Parliament. I've done other things in my career, perhaps. And that was the outcome of facing 18 years under the Tories, which is really what I found with the career I had, in effect, signed up to. I hadn't intended to sign up to it by any means at all. And it was a very bad period for the Labour Party. Having said that was it, and I was then 18 years in opposition to the Tories. I don't think I was a very good opposition member. I wasn't cut out for it. And the party itself was going through a horrendous period of internal turmoil, not terribly unlike the one we seem to be intent presently on plunging ourselves into.
Is it because that you haven't learned any lessons from the past?
Well, I don't know. It's various explanations for it. It could be that in part, but I think they have. It's not as bitter. It's not quite the internecine sort of warfare we had then. It is more pleasant in personal terms, but perhaps they've forgotten what it did to us when we had that terrible period, where militant were the motivating force there. Now, I think this is more a reaction to that prolonged period of 13 years. We've never had anything like that in our history before. 13 years of Labour government, where the one thing everybody remembers is Iraq, which isn't much to our credit, where Tony really pushed the party in that direction, and on grounds that turned out to be less than wholly convincing. And I think that left a very bad feeling in the party as a whole, and it's that reaction to the strains of government and responsibility, which were exacerbated by some bad decisions of Tony. I think he was a very, very good leader of the party. Come on, he won 3 elections, 2 by massive majorities.
But
Fabulous.
We did decline majorities, unlike Lady Thatcher, who increased her majorities, but Tony Blair he decreased his majority.
First of all, you can only say what a magnificent achievement. I don't think that holds up at all. I mean, Mrs. Thatcher certainly won margin in '79. We'll have to answer that phone, I'm afraid. Let's deal with that first. First of all, I'll take it as anybody important.
Geoffrey Robinson's phone.
First of all, you've got to realise. Why you want to do it now? I mean, I'm only doing it to please you.
Oh yes, could you ring you back, please, Neil?
Of course you can. Shall I give you my number?
I can take it down. Just a second.
Sounds
Sorry.
very.
Right, where were we up to there?
Tony Blair's majority is
Yeah, that was a fantastic achievement. With that, Mrs. Thatcher got 20 or 30 first time round, and she pushed it up very fantastic on the back of the Falklands War, which is that, and then held it in. So that was 79, 83. Held it in 87, but it was already
increased as well in 87.
No,
Slightly.
very slightly, if you like, but basically held it. Whereas Tony came in a massive majority compared with 20. He had 170, 160, didn't he? And held it. In 4 years' time. It was a fantastic achievement, and it went down to a total majority of only 60. Still more than Mrs. Thatcher started with in the third election. So I think really it's an almost unbetterable record in terms of electoral success. And I think we achieved an enormous amount, that government. And I think Gordon's government would come, and Gordon, if you played as Chancellor, made a huge contribution, played a vital role in the Labour government for the first 10 years before he became Chancellor, before he moved from Chancellor to become Prime Minister for the last 3. He was an unlucky Prime Minister. That was bad luck, really, on a massive scale. It's a great pity because it ruined his whole premiership. He could have been a very great Prime Minister, I think. He had the making of a better Prime Minister than Tony. But Tony was in some ways more cut out to be a leader. Wouldn't have been a better Prime Minister. I don't know how I can combine those two concepts.
And they both played a very important role to lead your party to victory for 3 general elections. But why?
Yes.
Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, they toxic to your party?
I don't think Gordon ever was toxic to the party. Tony became that because I think, and since then, he has become it because of his behaviour since he left office hasn't wholly commended itself, I don't think, to the party or the Labour Party, or to the country as a whole. I think unfairly generally, but the fact that he's seemed to profited so obviously from the success of his political career irks some people. I think unfairly, but it's a fact that that is the case. I believe that the principal, biggest single toxic element in the Labour Party's record that is still infecting the whole party in a very significant way, and I think really it destroyed confidence in the Labour Party and the Labour government, was Iraq. Now only Tony can tell you, the extent to which he was and remains convinced of the rightness of the war, and indeed it's difficult to see, it would be difficult to see any Prime Minister not going along with the British Prime Minister, not going along with the Americans in that situation. And that seems to me to be the ultimate determinant. But I think what people got upset about was he was so obviously taking a lead in it, so obviously engaging with Bush in a way that was excessive. And it was that excessive pressure and leading, and it just didn't strike the right note.
But it seems that we're repeating the same mistake in Syria.
Well, you might think that, mind you. I hope not. We're certainly not going to put boots on the ground, and as I think throughout the House there's an ultimate.
But even airstrikes, we're going to have many casualties, civilian casualties mainly.
Well, I don't know how many there'll be in that. I don't know, and it looks though he has assembled a majority for it. I can't do.
And mostly within your party.
I don't know what the split in my party will be. It's clearly a divided party, in the sense it's more divided than Tories. The Tories have 20, say, MPs, but very senior MPs, very thoughtful MPs. Against it, we may be a very split party. I don't know, 60-40, something of that kind, for and against. But on big issues like this, you expect splits. They don't worry me so much. Our handling of the split, I think, has been much worse. The Tories got a smaller split, but they're still split. And it's a very big issue. But nobody's going to make the mistake of Iraq, which is to go in blunderbusting in the way we did in Iraq with the Americans, without a proper plan for coming out. We are doing some fairly, hopefully well-defined bombing raids to contain ISIL. If we don't do the bombing, it's clear they would take over the whole of Syria and the whole of Iraq. There's no doubt about that. Well, I'm persuaded of that.
But we need a political settlement after our intervention. But it seems that we're far away from that political settlement.
Miles away from it, yes. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. But the thing is, if we were not to bomb now, I think ISIL would overrun Syria and Iraq and probably establish their caliphate. Where would they stop? Egypt would be threatened, Jordan would be threatened, Libya would be threatened, the other side of Egypt, of course. I think the whole of the that whole area where they've declared they want to establish a caliphate, I mean, they do pose a real and present threat to the UK and to the neighbours in that area. And for some reason, they're able to motivate, and certainly they have plenty of money. I mean, they're one of the best armed, best financed military forces in the world. So it's no good pretending that they're not a threat, and it's no good pretending that the bombing isn't necessary in the short term, perhaps medium term, to contain that threat. But it's not going to resolve it, it's not going to remove that threat. And that's why we have to assemble, you're quite right, initially a regional force, probably to destroy ISIS or Daesh on the ground, and then get to the political settlement. I don't think you could move from where we are now to a political settlement. There's no will for it.
For instance, Turkey, you talked about the regional force, but for instance, Turkey, they're bombing their own people, Kurds, and they're also buying oil from ISIS. How could that be?
Well, it can be. How could it be? It is. I mean, it's the point. It's madness, I agree. And other people are buying oil from there, but they've also get arms from the people that the Americans...
Saudis, and we provide arms to...
It's crazy.
Saudis.
That's why we need a regional settlement. Obviously you need that, but it'll come about, I think, only by first economic sanctions of a very effective kind. I agree entirely with, as everybody with any sense does, with Jeremy Corbyn about that. Of course we need that. We need a political settlement. It's the only solution. But the idea you could suddenly conjure up a political settlement out of the utter chaos, political chaos we have in the Middle East at the moment, and from the disparate forces at work in the area, is just wishful thinking, pie in the sky. What we need immediately now, and any way forward really, is for the regional force here to assemble an armed a containment on the ground of ISIL and Daesh to contain them and confront them and deal with them, and that we can only provide hold the ring while they do that, and that's where we're trying to.
And how David Cameron has handled the debate in your view?
Well, he's not doing too badly. I don't think he's a very good Prime Minister in overseas affairs. He's got us in the European thing, we've lost influence there.
Libya.
Libya, there was a bad mistake there. We have no influence with Russia. We've managed to alienate the Russians. I mean, I think he just isn't a very good Prime Minister in foreign affairs. I think he's a very good party manager, surprisingly good, brilliant party manager. He's done extraordinarily well for the Conservative Party. And he won that, but electorally he hasn't got much to offer. Gordon Brown fought him to a standstill. In the worst financial crisis for a century, Gordon managed to deny him a majority, formidable achievement, which people haven't taken on board yet. So his first general election he fails to get a majority. The next one he assembles just about a majority. What have they got? How many have they got there?
312.
Yeah, but what's their majority?
12.
12. Pathetic, isn't it, really?
Yes.
You know? So he's not a great electoral success story. But he's held them together, kept them together. He plunges into as I said, the referendum in Europe. He's now, trying to re-establish some credibility. But generally speaking, I think he's been an ineffectual leader in foreign affairs.
And Tories, they split, but this split has been overshadowed because your own party is split as well.
Yeah, you're quite right, and the press will always make whatever they can of us. We know that of any split in our party. They make mincemeat of us, and they're carving us up terribly. We have a major problem on our hands, and you and I are going to have to resume this at some other time because the phone keeps ringing, and I warned you it would be very bad. We have to reach out. I did tell you,
yes,
left me outside the office, somewhere where it's calm.
We will do it again with pleasure. It was a great pleasure, Geoffrey Robinson.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.